to the elders past, present and emerging. Acknowledging you all for coming out tonight. Big voice, closer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lee, who worked. But it reminds me there's so many people across 3 decades that make up a sort of family that Karen has bonded together through our union, the broader trade union movement, the Labor movement, but also the Labor Party. And I want to thank those members who have made the effort to come along and help mark this incredible achievement. I was just thinking about in the context of you, Bill, actually, when you rang me the other day and you said, I've got to shift a couple of appointments so I can get my Sydney tasks done Monday and Tuesday, and that'll put me in Melbourne on Wednesday so I can be here. And I want to thank you very much for making that effort. There's quite a bond that goes back through a few generations in the connection between our families, and having you here is very important, and I just wanted to call that out. I also wanted to acknowledge a couple of past presidents of our union who are here tonight, Mr. Goodall and Mr. Keogh, although if they came forward and stood next to their Avenger outfit, you probably wouldn't recognise them, but thank you, team, for coming along. I also want to acknowledge the staff members, both current and previous employees of Karen's, who've turned out tonight to also pay an amazing acknowledgement to your achievement, Karen. So thank you, one and all. Our great friends from South Australia who have travelled, Jan, Secretary of our PSA for not quite as long, but started about the same time as Karen did in '93 and weathered all those storms, has travelled across to see it. I think we've also cited Thurza, who will wave to me somewhere here down the back there, who's come up from Tasmania, who's our secretary down there. So thank you for that effort. And Shay's come down from our Sydney office and making the effort. And of course, it's nice to have Sharon and Peterborough back in Melbourne. And congratulations on your new work. So thank you again for turning up. You'll see a photo flying around, and if Bill's still here, I'll mention it in these notes that I have, but it's one of Karen's favourites, and it goes back to the waterfront dispute and Bill and Karen on the picket at East Swanson, and I think I'll probably safely say it's one of Karen's favourite photos of the time. I think there's another one there of our brother John Coombs, now departed. I think there's the Secretary, John, again, of the Vehicle Builders, who's also now passed away. At the front of the Trades Hall meeting, Nat Hutchins was there as Assistant Secretary. You were there chairing that meeting for the MUA that day, and I think, again, that's probably one of the favourite shots that are flying around. It's pretty scary when you've shared this journey, as I and a whole number of people in the room tonight have, looking at how we've aged and weathered, and I think, quite honestly, I'm glad Perica turned up because he made the rest of us look fantastic. So, Karen, Deputy President Perica, no, thank you, and to Jane as well. But Karen, we say 30 years and throw away 3 decades just to think that when you look at how you have survived the years and how you were at a young age and how you are now after all of that stress and pressure, you've held up extremely well, and your travelling is fantastic. Can I say it goes back to earlier than '93. Karen actually was elected the secretary in quite a hot contest. There were 5 organised tickets back then, and Karen has been stated was the first elected secretary and also the first woman to be elected secretary in our union's 100 years of history at that time. You'll see there's an enormous representation of women behind us, but Karen is at the forefront of that. And if you think of 30 years in the context of our union's 138-year history now, that's like, 1 year in for every 5, Karen. So it's quite a remarkable achievement in the history of our union. that covers so many significant contributors, and clearly you've made the semis. I think we'd probably get you a spot in the finals for that one, but you're well up there amongst them. So Karen's union involvement actually predates 1993 because she was first elected as the Statutory Authorities Rep, VARC. It was John Kane Quango. And you were elected to the State Council in '89 as that rep, and then was elected as the Senior Vice President in 1991. And while it was a time where the young progressive forces within the union had replaced the old guard pretty much in total by 91-92, just as the Kennett government swept to power. So we timed that brilliant. Kennett presented so many employee relations challenges that it would have been rude not to have taken them on, and Karen did. She led our union, along with all the other Victorian leaders, during the trade hall demonstrations in the late 90s, early 93. We rallied at the time against Kennett's anti-worker agenda, and it saw our Public Service Board abolished. We lost our tribunal. Legislation was introduced to allow for individual contracts of employment. We actually had negotiated a 5.2% pay increase with the Kerner government, and that pay rise disappeared. And so did our leave loading, which was removed retrospectively at the end of '92 as well. I know, it's all right, there's a good ending to that story.
It gets better.
It gets better. So, as has been pointed out, we were heading off to the Christmas party on Christmas Eve '92, and Karen thought she'll just drop by the admin area and check the incoming facsimiles, the latest in technology. And we discovered that a nice letter from Jeff had been sent to the union saying that they had enacted legislation to cancel all of our contracts with the government departments to collect our union fees via PRDs. So we actually paid for the service. It wasn't like a gift to us, so they cut off their nose to spite their face, but it was sort of like an attempt to bankrupt us. And as you can imagine, it was a Friday, I think, of Christmas Eve. We were heading to the pub. The staff hadn't been paid. We had the 4-day Christmas break up and all the holidays associated with bank closures. But then the following week, we got into it and worked out how we could get extended lines of credit and people paid, and then get about the task of re-signing members as redundancies were happening all around the service. Those of us that were there in Lonsdale Street at that time will remember having all the seats put out in the training room, and we were organising members by their bank by BSB numbers because the bank required that, and you oversaw that. We got the job done. There's probably heaps of beer and heaps of wine and heaps of pizzas, but we managed to re-sign and get our members financial and about the task that was ahead of us. For us, ironically, it turned that savage attack on our finances backfiring because the government in the years ahead were no longer having access to information about who in the workplace was a union member. And we had great fun playing with that as they used to block our email domain going into departments as we used to try and contact our members. Email was a new technology at that stage too. And that was a great win for us psychologically, and it kept morale up. Kennett was introducing contracts, so Karen decided that our best strategy was to apply for the minimum wage adjustment, and there were $8 a week payments available. So she got the senior team together and we made an application, and we went down to what was then the Employee Relations Commission of Victoria, chaired by Susan Zeitz. And Karen got on her feet and led the application, and we won. So Karen was devising and implementing a strategy to provide pay rises for members, thank you Peter, that was almost the equivalent of the money that was being offered to our membership to sign on to individual contracts, which was stripping their entitlements. So importantly, as part of that decision, the newly formed ERCV, Bill Pym was there, those who will remember Bill Pym, great man, awarded the adjustment, but also recognised that true bargaining wasn't available So they established a specific bargaining order for the public service, and that included an arbitral power. Now that was something that was actually avoided in any of the legislation. Kenneth did not want arbitral powers, he wanted arbitration only by consent. I'll skip the page. So there's a special piece of Kenneth memorabilia on Victoria's statute books in Karen's honour, and it's called an Act to Quash Certain Decisions of the Employee Relations Commission of Victoria. It's real, they did it to remove this public sector bargaining order, but we knew we had them on the run by that stage, Karen. We successfully launched action in the Magistrates Court to uphold provisions in the state contracts that our members were signing, where they were promised market rate adjustments, and we won in the Magistrates Court against the Kenneth government. I can see Debbie Hill nodding, remembers part of that life. And this lifted our members' morale enormously. Kenneth appealed us to the Supreme Court, and they overturned the lower court decision, obviously. And we were benefited, I suppose, because significant time had elapsed, and we were on the verge of winning our federal award, and we would ultimately escape the state regime. So we've been pursuing our federal award, and I think the joke mark at the time, wasn't it? It was to log, like how many logs of claims had we had to lodge to try and get a dispute finding. We also faced the prospect of challenges in the federal court that led us to the High Court, which in October 1995, it found in favour of all public sector unions in the case that's known as REAU, that state public sector workers and public servants specifically could have their wages and entitlements regulated under federal law. And by December 1996, our first federal award was made, and all the rises that had been paid under contracts were awarded to members who hadn't signed under the award and backdated, and we had our holiday leave loading returned and backdated. It was an enormous There's a great cartoon in the story here about it's only a flesh wound. Well, that arises from the fact that there was no system left in Victoria effectively, because most public sector unions had used the Keating amendments to move into that system. And now with us in there too, Kenneth ceded Victoria's IR powers to the Commonwealth as a result, effectively declaring Victoria the same as a territory of the Commonwealth to enable that to do that. But we worked out pretty quickly that the reason that he did that was so that he could offer Australian workplace agreements, individual contracts, under the federal system to our members. So the first few years of the fight was going to be revisited on us again with the outset of AWAs. So as Kenneth had done in the 90s to employees to sign a contract, he did the same to them in the late 90s, where if you were seeking a promotion or a secondment, and of course if you were a new starter, you were required to sign these contracts. Effectively, they weren't anything more than an individual cover letter that basically referred all of your entitlements to departmental policy. So you can imagine what that was like, trying to work out and find a solution in a dispute about what you were paid or owed. There was also a proliferation of non-union collective agreements under the federal legislation, and we fought and rallied our members to knock over a whole stream of those every time they went to a ballot. And Calvin will probably remember the one in his Department of Infrastructure that was up by 8 votes. But we have a happy ending to that story as well. So we were lucky in a way, because when the legislation was going through the Senate in those days, I think the Labor and Democrats at the time combined their numbers and inserted important arbitral powers in the legislation and organised proclamation of the Act to frustrate Kenneth's push to hang on his control. And we ended up with what was then known, and those geeks in the room will understand, the 170 MX arbitral powers that could only be accessed by having the Industrial Relations Commission terminate bargaining between the parties on evidence that bargaining had broken down. So Karen knew that Kennett wouldn't negotiate again, but we had to show the Industrial Relations Commission, the Deputy President, I think it was Jack McBean, that there was no negotiation for contracts. So Karen organised a team, and a couple of people in the room will remember this. We called them notable negotiators. I think Lee Hubbard was one of them. Bill Kelby was another. And we offered them to our members to be their bargaining rep to go in and negotiate their terms and conditions with the department IR people. And you can imagine how those senior public servants responded to that. They had nowhere to go. Bill had them tied in knots. And he went down to see Jack McBean when we finally gave evidence in that case to have the bargaining terminated. He said, Jack, they're just not interested in negotiating. Terminate this bargaining. It was a fantastic moment in our history. And of course, he did terminate our bargaining, giving us access to that arbitral stream, just as the 99 state election was upon us. And it was a huge day for Karen in a number of respects, because it was September 99 and Carlton had been favourites Essendon in the preliminary final by a point. And Steve Braxton Labor had swarmed all over a swag of regional and metro seats and put the Kennett government on the precipice of defeat. I'd been talking to Karen during the day about getting organised for media comment that night, and I said maybe the best we could hope for would be to get Kennett into a coalition, because the Libs have the numbers in their own right, and maybe with the National Party require them to form government, and maybe that was the best outcome we could get, and then we'd have some soft points to go and poke over the next couple of years. But fortunately, a month later, I think the state member for Frankston had died on the morning of that election, so a by-election had to be held. Unfortunately, Jed. Did I say fortunately? Yeah, I'm not a suspect. And that a month later had Labor win that by-election, and of course the independents then letting Labor know and Braxton know that they would give them supply, and Kennett was gone. We were still here. We used to have a staff member band that used to just play at a few social functions. If they were still formed together, we probably would have had to hear them tonight. But there was a great Spooner cartoon of Jeff and Ron Walker and William Lloyd Williams that was done of the four of them all together with their hair up in a little dancing line. And it ran in the papers at the time that I think he opened Crown Casino. Well, the staff band called themselves the Dead Kennets. And Karen had received a nice Christmas card from Jeff Kennett during one of the years that he was Premier, saying, as it is the season of goodwill, ha ha ha. So when when we had returned our conditions, and when he was on the eve of, actually after he had been defeated, Karen sent him a nice poster of our band, which was called the Dead Kennets, with the Spooner cartoon, saying, as it is the season of goodwill, best wishes for your future, or something like that. We had an interesting start to the Brax government, because we were in the MX award process, and we had that other great Deputy President, Colin Polites, who's no longer with us. He was overseeing the case, and he was about to award us all the pay rises and have people coming off AWAs because of a Brax government commitment, and all the members who were stuck on the non-union agreements also joining the MX award and giving us an extra 2% that the others hadn't received. And we were called down by Tim Pallas, who was Chief of Staff to Steve, and I think Peter Keogh was in that meeting as well. And I and Karen went down to 1TP, and we were in the Melbourne room, or another side room, And Tim was coming in saying, guys, what do you want to end this case? We'll find a solution, we'll do an agreement, blah, blah, blah. And we're saying, well, what are you offering? So it was going back and forward. So Tim was coming in and out, getting his instructions, I think, from some fictitious person in another room, pretending that there was some, dialogue and he was acting on instructions. And we ended up saying no, Tim, and there was quite a story, and I won't go into the detail, but Karen might share some of Tim Pallis's antics, yes, that many who probably worked with him will know. And anyway, so the end was that we said no to the Brax government, and we took the MX award, and life went on very well after that. From 2000 to 2008, Karen negotiated new collective agreements with the Brax government, including a new classification system in 2003. It was the Exceptional Matters Order brought down by Greg Smith. So thank you, Greg. I know he sent a nice message, Karen. And there's a list of them here too that I'll provide to you. And that restored a career service, something that we hadn't had for a decade. And it put the broadband pay scales, which was this mystery classification structure that Kenneth had produced, into the dustbin of history. And then she successfully extended the new service-wide agreement in 2006 under the provisions of the Labor Act to avoid work choices, and that saved our members from that regime as well. Then we had a change of government in Victoria in 2010, and we faced the Baillieu-Napthine government, but they were having their own problems. But we successfully roped them in to the Industrial Relations Commission at the end of 2011, I think, from memory. And they capitulated their case pretty early on in the hearings, and Karen had an approach from the Secretary of the Premier's Department and organised a settlement, and a workplace determination was made, I think, as that flowed conditions and pay rises through, of course, to all of our members under that. So I think it's been mentioned, but over 30 years you've seen like 9 parliaments, 7 premiers, 8 Vic Union elections you've won, plus you were elected as Federal Secretary in 22, and since then in 2016 and 2021, in the middle of COVID, so no short achievement. You're an ACT Vice President and an Executive Member. Obviously your time here at Trades Hall. I'm getting notes here. As Trades Hall President, if it's open, I don't know, Luke will run little tours of the council chamber after this for anybody who wants to go up. It's worthwhile having a look. And Karen was made a life member of our union in 2009, so well done. Personally, I'm not a great believer in karma, just doing the jobs and the hard work and you get the result you work for. But I think Karen's a great example of, sometimes the right people turn up at the right time and forge a history of achievement representing and protecting other people who need assistance. And Karen definitely turned up for our union at the right time. I'm going to call her up now, but I just want to say congratulations, Karen, on your achievements. And 30 years is incredible in history, and what people will be talking about, like we talk about other people through our history and their contributions. And if you have a look at some of the names, you'll see some of the outstanding people that have been leaders, and you are definitely at a par with those. So congratulations.